This is a timeline of women's suffrage in the United States. Timeline 1777 – Women lose the right to vote in the state of New York. 1780 – Women lose the right to vote in Massachusetts. 1784 – Women lose the right to vote in New Hampshire. 1787 – The U.S. Constitutional Convention places voting qualifications in the hands of the states. Women in all states except New Jersey lose the right to vote. 1790 – The U.S. state of New Jersey grants the vote to all free inhabitants, including women. 1807 – Women lose the right to vote in New Jersey, the last state to revoke the right. 1838 – Kentucky passes the first statewide woman suffrage law allowing female heads of household in rural areas to vote in elections deciding on taxes and local boards for the new county common school system. 1848 – The Seneca Falls Convention, the first women's rights convention, is held in Seneca Falls, New York. Women's suffrage is proposed by Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and agreed to after an impassioned argument from Frederick Douglass. 1850 – The first National Women's Rights Convention, in Worcester, Massachusetts, attracts more than 1,000 participants from 11 states. 1853 – On the occasion of the World's Fair in New York City, suffragists hold a meeting in the Broadway Tabernacle. 1861–1865 – The American Civil War. Most suffragists focus on the war effort, and suffrage activity is minimal. 1866 – The American Equal Rights Association, working for suffrage for both women and African Americans, is formed at the initiative of Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. 1867 – Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Susan B. Anthony, and Lucy Stone address a subcommittee of the New York State Constitutional Convention requesting that the revised Constitution include woman suffrage. Their efforts fail. 1867 – Kansas holds a state referendum on whether to enfranchise women and/or black males. Lucy Stone, Susan B. Anthony, and Elizabeth Cady Stanton traverse the state speaking in favor of women's suffrage. Both women's and black male suffrage is voted down. 1868 – The 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution is ratified, introducing the word «male» into the Constitution for the first time, in Section 2 of the amendment. 1869 – The Territory of Wyoming is the first to grant unrestricted suffrage to women. 1869 – The suffrage movement splits into the National Woman Suffrage Association and the American Woman Suffrage Association. The NWSA is formed by Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony after their accusing abolitionist and Republican supporters of emphasizing black civil rights at the expense of women's rights. The AWSA is formed by Lucy Stone, Julia Ward Howe, and Thomas Wentworth Higginson, and it protests the confrontational tactics of the NWSA and ties itself closely to the Republican Party while concentrating solely on securing the vote for women state by state. Elizabeth Cady Stanton was the first president of the National Woman Suffrage Association. Julia Ward Howe was the first president of the American Woman Suffrage Association. 1870 – The Utah Territory grants suffrage to women. 1870 – The 15th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution is adopted. The amendment holds that neither the United States nor any state can deny the right to vote, "on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude", leaving open the right of states to deny the right to vote on account of sex. Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton oppose the amendment. Many of their former allies in the abolitionist movement, including Lucy Stone, support the amendment. 1871 – Victoria Woodhull speaks to the Judiciary Committee of the U.S. House of Representatives, arguing that women have the right to vote under the 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, but the committee does not agree. 1871 – The Anti-Suffrage Society is formed. 1872 – A suffrage proposal before the Dakota Territory Legislature loses by one vote. 1872 – Susan B. Anthony registers and votes in Rochester, New York, arguing that the 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution gives her that right. However, she is arrested a few days later. Victoria Woodhull was the first female to run for President of the United States, nominated by the Equal Rights Party, with a platform supporting women's suffrage and equal rights. 1873 – The trial of Susan B. Anthony is held. She is denied a trial by jury and loses her case. She never pays the $100 fine for voting. 1873 There is a suffrage demonstration at the centennial of the Boston Tea Party. 1874 In the case of Minor v. Happersett, the Supreme Court rules that the 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution does not grant women the right to vote. 1874 There is a referendum in Michigan on women's suffrage, but women's suffrage loses. 1875 Women in Michigan and Minnesota win the right to vote in school elections. 1878 A federal amendment to grant women the right to vote is introduced for the first time by Senator A.A. Sargent of California. 1880 New York State grants school suffrage to women. 1882 The U.S. House and Senate both appoint committees on women's suffrage, which both report favorably. 1883 Women in the Washington Territory are granted full voting rights. 1884 The U.S. House of Representatives debates women's suffrage. 1886 The suffrage amendment is defeated 2-1 in the U.S. Senate. 1887 The Edmunds-Tucker Act takes the vote away from women in Utah in order to suppress the Mormon vote in the Utah Territory. 1887 The Supreme Court strikes down the law that enfranchised women in the Washington Territory. 1887 In Kansas, women win the right to vote in municipal elections. 1887 Rhode Island becomes the first eastern state to vote on a women's suffrage referendum, but it does not pass. 1888–1889 Wyoming had already granted women voting and suffrage since 1869–70. Now they insist that they maintain suffrage if Wyoming joins the Union. 1890 The National Woman Suffrage Association and the American Woman Suffrage Association merge to form the National American Woman Suffrage Association. Its first president is Elizabeth Cady Stanton. The focus turns to working at the state level. Wyoming renewed general women's suffrage, becoming the first state to allow women to vote. 1890 A suffrage campaign loses in South Dakota. 1893 After a campaign led by Carrie Chapman Catt, Colorado men vote for women's suffrage. 1894 Despite 600,000 signatures, a petition for women's suffrage is ignored in New York. 1895 The New York State Association opposed to women's suffrage begins. 1895 The National American Woman Suffrage Association dissociates itself from Elizabeth Cady Stanton's The Woman's Bible, a critique of Christianity. 1896 Women's suffrage returns to Utah upon gaining statehood. 1896 The National American Woman Suffrage Association hires Ida Husted Harper to launch an expensive suffrage campaign in California, which ultimately fails. 1896 Idaho grants women suffrage. 1897 The National American Woman Suffrage Association begins publishing the National Suffrage Bulletin, edited by Carrie Chapman Catt. 1900 Carrie Chapman Catt becomes the new leader of the National American Woman Suffrage Association. 1902 Women from 10 nations meet in Washington, D.C. to plan an international effort for suffrage. Clara Barton is among the speakers. 1902 The men of New Hampshire vote down a women's suffrage referendum. 1904 The National American Woman Suffrage Association adopts a Declaration of Principles. 1904 Because Carrie Chapman Catt must attend to her dying husband, Rev. Dr. Anna Howard Shaw takes over as president of the National American Woman Suffrage Association. 1906 Elizabeth Cady Stanton's daughter, Harriet Stanton Blatch, returns from England and forms the Equality League of Self-Supporting Women with a membership based on professional and industrial working women. It initiates the practice of holding suffrage parades. 1910 Emma Smith DeVoe organizes a grassroots campaign in Washington state, where women win suffrage. 1910 Harriet Stanton Blatch's Equality League changes its name to the Women's Political Union. 1910 Emulating the grassroots tactics of labor activists, the Women's Political Union organizes America's first large-scale suffrage parade, which is held in New York City. 1910 Washington grants women the right to vote. 1911 California grants women suffrage. 1911 In New York City, 3,000 people march for women's suffrage. 1912 Theodore Roosevelt's Progressive Party includes women's suffrage in its platform. 1912 Abigail Scott Duniway dissuades members of the National American Woman Suffrage Association from involving themselves in Oregon's grassroots suffrage campaign. Oregon women win the vote. 1912 Arizona grants women's suffrage. 1912, Kansas grants women's suffrage. 1912, Alaska's territorial legislature grants women's suffrage. 1913, Alice Paul becomes the leader of the Congressional Union (CU), a militant branch of the National American Woman Suffrage Association. 1913, Alice Paul organizes the Woman's Suffrage Procession, a parade in Washington, D.C. on the eve of Woodrow Wilson's inauguration. It is the largest suffrage parade to date. The parade is attacked by a mob, and hundreds of women are injured but no arrests are made. 1913, the Alaskan Territory grants women's suffrage. 1913, Illinois grants municipal and presidential but not state suffrage to women. 1913, Kate Gordon organizes the Southern States Women's Suffrage Conference, where suffragists plan to lobby state legislatures for laws that will enfranchise white women only. 1913, the Senate votes on a women's suffrage amendment, but it does not pass. 1914, Nevada grants women's suffrage. 1914, Montana grants women's suffrage. 1914, the Congressional Union alienates leaders of the National American Woman Suffrage Association by campaigning against pro-suffrage Democrats in the congressional elections. 1915, Carrie Chapman Catt replaces Anna Howard Shaw as president of the National American Woman Suffrage Association, partly due to the constant turmoil on the national board caused by Shaw's lack of administrative expertise. 1916, Alice Paul and others break away from the National American Woman Suffrage Association and form the National Woman's Party. 1916, Woodrow Wilson promises that the Democratic Party platform will endorse women's suffrage. 1916, Montana elects suffragist Jeannette Rankin to the House of Representatives. She is the first woman elected to the U.S. Congress. 1917, beginning in January, the National Woman's Party posts silent Sentinels of Liberty, also known as the Silent Sentinels, at the White House. The National Woman's Party is the first group to picket the White House. In June, the arrests begin. Nearly 500 women are arrested, and 168 serve jail time. November 14, 1917, the Night of Terror occurs at the Occoquan Workhouse in Virginia, in which suffragist prisoners are beaten and abused. 1917, the U.S. enters WWI. Under the leadership of Carrie Chapman Catt, the National American Woman Suffrage Association aligns itself with the war effort in order to gain support for women's suffrage. 1917, Arkansas grants women the right to vote in primary, but not general elections. 1917, Rhode Island grants women presidential suffrage. 1917, the New York State Constitution grants women suffrage. New York is the first eastern state to fully enfranchise women. 1917, the Oklahoma State Constitution grants women's suffrage. 1917, the South Dakota State Constitution grants women's suffrage. 1918, the jailed suffragists are released from prison. An appellate court rules all the arrests were illegal. 1918, the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which eventually granted women's suffrage, passes the U.S. House with exactly a two-thirds vote but loses by 2 votes in the Senate. Jeannette Rankin opens debate on it in the House, and President Wilson addresses the Senate in support of it. 1918, President Wilson declares his support for women's suffrage. 1919, Michigan grants women full suffrage. 1919, Oklahoma grants women full suffrage. 1919, South Dakota grants women full suffrage. 1919, the National American Woman's Suffrage Association holds its convention in St. Louis, where Carrie Chapman Catt rallies to transform the association into the League of Women Voters. 1919, in January, the National Women's Party lights and guards a "Weichfire for Freedom." It is maintained until the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution passes the U.S. Senate on June 4. 1920, the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution is ratified, stating, "The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex." 1920, in the case of Hawk v. Smith, anti-suffragists file suit against the Ohio legislature, but the Supreme Court upholds the constitutionality of Ohio's ratification process. 1924, Native American women played a vital role in this change, but are still unable to reap the benefits until 4 years later on June 24, 1924, when the American government grants citizenship to Native Americans through the Indian Citizenship Act. However, many states nonetheless make laws and policies which prohibit Native Americans from voting, and many are effectively barred from voting until 1948. 1952, the race restrictions of the 1790 Naturalization Law are repealed by the McCarran-Walter Act, giving first-generation Japanese Americans, including women, citizenship and voting rights. 1964, the 24th Amendment is ratified by two-thirds of the states, formally abolishing poll taxes and literacy tests which were heavily used against African American and poor white women and men. 1965, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 strenuously prohibits racial discrimination in voting, resulting in greatly increased voting by African American women and men. 1966, Harper v. Virginia Board of Elections strikes down poll taxes at all levels of government. 1984, Mississippi becomes the last state in the Union to ratify the 19th Amendment. See also: Timeline of voting rights in the United States, Timeline of women's suffrage worldwide, Women's suffrage, Women's suffrage in the United States. References. External links. Woman's Suffrage History Timeline from the Women's Rights National Historic Park in Seneca Falls, NY. **